France, December 1944. Snow drifts over the Ardennes forest, muting the thunder of artillery somewhere beyond the ridgeline. A U.S. Sherman tank idles in the cold, its steel hull trembling as the engine growls to life. Inside the cramped turret, a young gunner wipes frost from a small stubby weapon resting across his knees. It's not the gleaming Thompson submachine gun he'd seen in recruitment posters. This one looks crude. Stamped steel, a dull gray tube with a simple wire stock. To most eyes, it's nothing special. He pulls back the charging handle, a metallic click echoing through the hull. The weapon feels almost too light, too plain to trust. But when German infantry cut through the smoke ahead, and mud splashes against the periscope glass, he squeezes the trigger. The little gun answers with a steady, measured cough. No jams, no misfire, just cold efficiency. Outside, as tanks roll through ruined villages, soldiers carry the same odd-looking gun. They call it the grease gun, because it looks more like a mechanic's tool than a weapon of war. Yet soon this $20 piece of steel will prove itself not only reliable, but legendary. Its creator was not a general, but an engineer. By 1942, the United States was fighting a global war on two fronts, a battle for survival stretching from the jungles of the Pacific to the deserts of North Africa. Factories across America thundered night and day, forging tanks, rifles, and airplanes faster than any nation in history. But behind the victory slogans and assembly line pride, the U.S. Army faced a simple, frustrating problem. It could not arm every man who needed a gun. The Thompson submachine gun, the iconic Tommy gun of gangster fame, was the Army's main close combat weapon. It was powerful, reliable, and beautifully made. But beauty came at a price. Each Thompson required dozens of precision-machined parts, took hours to assemble, and cost nearly $200. A staggering sum in wartime, especially when millions of troops had to be equipped. The Army needed a weapon that any factory could build, and one so cheap and simple that it could roll off a production line like an automobile part. That challenge landed on the desk of the U.S. Ordnance Department in the spring of 1942. Their directive was blunt: design a submachine gun that could be produced quickly, withstand mud and grit, fire the same .45 ACP ammunition, and cost a fraction of the Thompson. The number floated around ordnance memos was astonishing: $20 per gun. At first, few engineers believed it was possible. Firearms were not made like car bumpers or typewriter casings. They required fine tolerances, careful machining, and experienced gunsmiths. But one man, George Hyde, a German-born firearms designer who had immigrated to the U.S. before the war, saw the challenge differently. Hyde had spent years building experimental weapons for the Inland Division of General Motors. He understood mass production, and he understood what the Army truly needed: simplicity, not perfection. Hyde began sketching what would become the M3 submachine gun, a weapon stripped of elegance, built entirely around practicality. He replaced milled parts with stamped sheet steel. He reduced the number of components to a bare minimum, fewer than half of what the Thompson required. The bolt rode inside a cylindrical receiver that could be welded rather than machined. The stock was a simple wire frame that folded neatly to the side. Even the safety was minimal: a simple dust cover that locked the bolt when closed. The weapon's design philosophy could be summed up in one sentence: make it cheap, make it durable, make it work. By late 1942, prototypes were ready for testing. The Army's Aberdeen Proving Ground received the first batch, unpolished, blackened weapons that looked more like plumbing tools than military arms. Testers were skeptical. The M3's stamped metal frame flexed under pressure. Its sights were crude. Its trigger pull was heavy. But when the range tests began, the results surprised everyone. The gun fired consistently. It handled mud, sand, and water without jamming. And it was light enough for paratroopers and tank crews to carry with ease. The Ordnance Department approved the design in December 1942. Production would begin under the Guide Lamp division of General Motors, a company that had never made guns before but was perfectly suited for stamped steel manufacturing. Within months, assembly lines were running in Anderson, Indiana, where factory workers, many of them women, welded, pressed, and riveted the M3 into existence. Each weapon cost roughly $18 to $22 depending on the batch. It was not beautiful. But it was exactly what the Army had asked for. A submachine gun that could be produced faster than it could be fired. Still, doubts lingered among soldiers and officers alike. Could such a crude weapon really be trusted in the chaos of battle? Many frontline troops preferred to hold on to their Thompsons. To them, the M3 looked unfinished, even fragile. Its plain, oily surface lacked the reassuring heft of a finely machined gun. But as 1943 turned into 1944, shipments of the new weapon increased. Tank units in England began receiving crates stamped U.S. submachine gun, Cal 45 M3. Soon, the grease gun, as troops mockingly called it, would cross the Channel and enter combat for the first time, and on the cold fields of Europe, the Army would learn that sometimes the ugliest weapon can be the most faithful one. By early 1943, the first shipments of the M3 had begun reaching units in North Africa and England. Soldiers uncrated the strange new weapon and stared at it in disbelief. It looked like something built from scrap metal in a workshop. A dull, gray cylinder with a thin wire stock and a barrel that seemed too short to trust. When word spread that the weapon cost less than the mess kits they carried, laughter followed. The grease gun nickname stuck instantly, but behind the jokes, the U.S. Army's ordnance officers and engineers at the Guide Lamp Division of General Motors knew they had created something special. Every aspect of the weapon's design reflected wartime necessity: speed, efficiency, and adaptability. The M3 could be manufactured using stamped steel sheets, pressed-in dies originally designed for car parts. The receiver halves were welded together like auto body panels. The trigger group was riveted, not hand-fitted. And unlike the Thompson, which required hours of machining and hand polishing, the M3 rolled off the line ready for use in a fraction of the time. At its peak, the guide lamp plant could turn out 15,000 M3s per month. Workers, many of them women new to factory work, learned to build guns the same way they had built headlights and carburetors. The assembly lines ran day and night, and soon crates of the new weapon began stacking high in government depots. The design's simplicity also made it remarkably easy to maintain. It could be field stripped without tools. A soldier only needed a cartridge or a screwdriver to pop the retaining pins. The bolt and spring slid out easily for cleaning. Its slower rate of fire, around 450 rounds per minute, meant less recoil and better control in tight spaces. And though the gun's finish was rough, its closed bolt firing system kept out dust and mud better than many expected. Reports from training grounds began filtering in. In Louisiana, tank crews praised the M3's compact size. It fit neatly inside cramped turrets where Thompsons could not. In airborne units, paratroopers found that the folding stock allowed the gun to hang securely against the body during jumps. Mechanics and truck drivers also received the M3, finding comfort in having a dependable, easy-to-store weapon that wouldn't snag on equipment. But the transition wasn't without challenges. The first production batches revealed flaws. The cocking handle mechanism was fragile and prone to bending. In the field, soldiers discovered that the retracting handle, which used a small crank, could jam if struck or clogged with mud. Ordnance engineers went back to the drawing board. Their fix would later evolve into the M3A1, which replaced the complex crank with a simple finger slot cut into the bolt, reducing both parts and failure points. The Army continued to test and refine. As one report from Aberdeen Proving Ground noted, the M3 is not a precision instrument. It is a soldier's tool, meant to be fired, dropped, cleaned with a rag, and fired again. That was precisely the point. The Thompson had been a gun for specialists. The M3 was a gun for everyone. By mid-1944, the weapon was officially standard issue for armored divisions, engineers, vehicle crews, and airborne units preparing for Operation Overlord. The timing was perfect. As U.S. forces readied themselves for the invasion of Europe, the Army now had a mass-producible weapon that could fill the ranks without draining budgets or factory capacity. In total, more than 600,000 M3s were produced by the end of the war. Its efficiency amazed procurement officers. Each one cost roughly 1/10 the price of a Thompson, yet performed nearly as well in combat conditions. The grease gun had become more than an industrial success. It was a quiet revolution in American arms manufacturing, a shift from craftsmanship to mass simplicity. It embodied the spirit of wartime innovation. That victory depended not on beauty, but on efficiency and reliability. And as the invasion of Europe loomed, thousands of M3s waited in crates along England's southern coast, ready to be carried ashore by soldiers who still doubted it. They would soon find out that George Hyde's $20 invention was far tougher than it looked. When the M3 reached the front, it carried with it 3 silent revolutions of engineering, economics, and tactics. Each one changed how America fought, built, and thought about war. The engineering angle. Simplicity by design. George Hyde's genius wasn't in inventing something new. It was in removing everything unnecessary. The M3 was not a craftsman's masterpiece. It was a mechanical poem written in sheet steel. Unlike the Thompson, which had over 80 precision-machined components, the M3 had barely 25. There were no polished surfaces, no decorative fittings, and no excessive machining. Everything served a purpose. The bolt was a simple cylindrical mass. The barrel screwed directly into the receiver with a basic thread. The magazine was double-column, single-feed, easy to stamp, easy to weld. Even the ejection port cover doubled as a safety, locking the bolt forward when closed. It was, in every sense, an engineer's gun, a weapon of function, not form. Hyde had drawn lessons from the British Sten gun, a weapon equally crude but brilliantly efficient. Yet the M3 went a step further. It fired from a closed bolt, improving accuracy. It was quieter and more stable, and its slower cyclic rate gave soldiers tighter control in bursts. The weapon's simplicity also gave it resilience. There were no delicate screws to strip, no fine springs to lose. Mud, sand, or rain could hardly stop it. Soldiers could drop it, drag it, or bury it, and it would still fire. The Army soon realized that the M3 wasn't just cheap, it was smartly engineered. The fewer the parts, the fewer the problems. It was a design philosophy decades ahead of its time, one that would influence post-war weapons like the Uzi and Mac 10.2. The economic angle, the $20 revolution. The story of the M3 cannot be told without understanding the economic miracle behind it. When General Motors' Guide Lamp Division received the contract, it was not a weapons factory. It made automobile headlamps. But wartime America had learned a powerful truth: industrial conversion. If a plant could shape metal, it could build weapons. Under the War Production Board's direction, American industry had turned itself into a war machine. The M3 became one of its shining examples. With car manufacturing suspended, GM engineers retooled their assembly lines for firearms production. Stamping presses that once shaped car fenders now cut receiver halves. Spot welders joined them in seconds. The result was astonishing: a weapon that could be made for roughly $18.36 per unit, compared to over $200 for a Thompson. Even more remarkable was the time saved. The Thompson required nearly 150 man-hours to complete. The M3 took fewer than 10. Factories could train unskilled workers in days, not months. The U.S. military now had a weapon that could be made faster than it could be shipped. In purely economic terms, the M3 wasn't just a success. It was a revolution in wartime efficiency. It proved that quantity and quality didn't have to be enemies. By the end of 1944, America could arm an entire division with M3s for the cost of a single bomber. That industrial might, that ability to mass-produce reliability became one of the defining strengths of the Allied war effort through the tactical angle. A tool for the modern battlefield. When the first units carried the M3 into combat, the reaction was cautious. Soldiers missed the heavy, reassuring feel of the Thompson, but within weeks that caution began to fade. The M3 wasn't a weapon meant for parades. It was a tool meant for close combat. Its 450 rounds per minute rate of fire allowed controlled bursts, conserving ammunition and maintaining accuracy. The Thompson, by contrast, fired nearly twice as fast, often spraying wildly. In the ruined streets of Normandy and the forests of the Ardennes, the grease gun proved invaluable. It was short, maneuverable, and ideal for close-quarters fighting. Tank crews found it perfect for self-defense when forced to abandon their vehicles. Paratroopers could strap it to their gear without adding weight. Engineers and vehicle drivers carried it easily in cramped compartments. In combat, it became known for one quality above all others: it never quit. Even when caked in mud or drenched in rain, it fired. Reports from the 3rd Armored Division described soldiers using the gun after dropping it in slush or crawling through snow, and it still Performed. Its understated firepower made it a silent companion, a weapon for the soldier who didn't need glory, only survival. The grease gun fit the character of the war's later years, efficient, stripped down, and relentless. It wasn't about showing power, it was about sustaining it. By late 1944, word spread across the front lines that the M3 had earned respect. Soldiers who had laughed at its looks began trading their Thompsons for it. Mechanics, drivers, and infantrymen alike found it easier to carry, easier to clean, and far easier to replace. The weapon had transcended its design, becoming a symbol of what wartime America stood for: resourceful engineering, mass efficiency, and functional dependability. And as battles intensified across Europe, a new perspective emerged: the human side of this humble gun. The human angle. A soldier's weapon, the M3 was born from blueprints, not heroics, but on the battlefield it became deeply personal. Soldiers developed quiet affection for it, not because it was glamorous, but because it worked when everything else failed. Infantrymen wrote home about the ugly little gun that never jammed, even after weeks in the mud. Tank crews carried it inside their turrets, knowing that if they had to bail out, it would give them a fighting chance. Paratroopers used it in the ruins of Carentan, engineers in the hedgerows of Normandy, and jeep drivers on the roads to Bastogne. Its simplicity gave it a kind of democratic spirit. The Thompson had felt like an officer's weapon, heavy, prestigious, and rare. The M3 was for everyone: the mechanic, the cook, the radio operator. It didn't demand special care or ceremony. It was as ordinary as the men who carried it, and maybe that's why it was loved. Soldiers found small, practical comforts in its design. The collapsible wire stock could double as a cleaning rod. The oil bottle in the pistol grip could be refilled with engine oil from a jeep. Some even wrapped the grip in tape for warmth, joking that the gun was cold as a ration tin. Letters from Europe in 1944 and 1945 speak of gratitude more than admiration. "It ain't much to look at," wrote one private from the 10th Armored Division, "but it'll shoot every time I pull the trigger, and that's all I ask." For men fighting in snow, rain, and terror, that was enough. The enemy angle. The view from the other side to the Germans. The M3 was an enigma. When Wehrmacht soldiers first encountered it, they assumed it was a crude copy of their own MP40. Some even mocked it, calling it der amerikanische Sten, the American Sten gun. But when captured examples were tested by German ordnance units, the reports were surprisingly respectful. Unlike the Sten, the M3 fired a heavy .45 ACP round, slower but devastating at close range. Its accuracy from a closed bolt impressed testers, and its robust simplicity matched the German ethos of Feldmäßigkeit, field practicality. In late 1944, German intelligence bulletins began warning that U.S. armored units were being issued a new, highly reliable submachine gun. Its distinctive coughing sound in combat became recognizable, slower and heavier than the MP40's rattle. Some German troops began scavenging captured M3s, preferring them to their own worn weapons during close urban fights. After the war, Soviet observers who examined captured examples from U.S. depots noted its minimalism with interest. The concept in a stamped, low-cost weapon with few moving parts would echo in later designs like the PPS-43 and eventually in Mikhail Kalashnikov's. Thinking about durability and manufacturability, the enemy's reaction said it all. The gun they had laughed at became a tool they quietly admired. The legacy angle. From the Ardennes to the Mekong, when the war ended in 1945, the M3 did not fade away. Instead, it continued to serve quietly and faithfully in nearly every American conflict that followed. The improved M3A1 entered production soon after, eliminating the fragile crank handle, adding a simple guide for loading magazines and refining the stock. Its improvements made it even easier to use and maintain, cementing its place as one of the most practical submachine guns ever built. In Korea, it became the weapon of tankers, vehicle crews, and officers. In the frozen hills near the Chosin Reservoir, Marines used it to defend themselves when their heavier weapons jammed in the cold. Soldiers praised it for firing even after being dropped in snow and ice. In Vietnam, the M3A1 returned once again, 2 decades after its birth. American special forces, helicopter crews, and even South Vietnamese troops used it for close-quarters defense. Though surrounded by newer weapons like the M16, the grease gun's ruggedness and compact frame kept it in service until the early 1970s. Astonishingly, some American tank units carried it as standard issue well into the 1990s, long after its supposed obsolescence. The M3's influence stretched far beyond its service life. Its core philosophy, low cost, high reliability, minimal parts, inspired entire generations of post-war submachine guns. The Swedish Carl Gustaf M45, the Israeli Uzi, and the Mac-10 all borrowed from its simplicity and stamped steel construction. Even today, military historians view the M3 as a quiet milestone, a weapon that bridged the gap between industrial mass production and modern modular small arms design. It wasn't elegant. It didn't need to be. It was efficient, and efficiency wins wars. By the war's end, soldiers had stopped laughing at George Hyde's creation. They carried it with pride, not because it was beautiful, but because it never betrayed them. And as the world's attention shifted to the final months of 1944, the M3's true test arrived in the snow-covered forests of Belgium, where chaos and cold would prove once and for all what this little $20 gun was truly made of. Ardennes Forest, December 1944. The snow came down like ash, thick, endless, and cruel. The temperature had fallen below freezing, and visibility was barely 100 yards. The Battle of the Bulge had begun. It was Germany's last desperate counteroffensive, a final gamble to split the Allied lines and drive to Antwerp. For American troops on the ground, it was chaos. Communication lines were shattered, units were isolated, surrounded or forced into frantic retreats through forests blanketed in white. Tanks bogged down in ice and mud. Carbines froze. Machine guns jammed. In that misery, one weapon quietly proved itself indispensable: the M3 grease gun. Inside the turrets of Sherman tanks, where every inch of space mattered, the grease gun was often the only firearm a crew could carry. The Thompson was too large, too heavy, too expensive to issue widely. But the M3, small and light, fit neatly beside the gunner's seat or under the commander's hatch. When German infantry tried to flank tanks at close range with Panzerfausts, crews used their M3s to fight back, spraying bursts from the open hatches as snow and smoke mixed in the freezing wind. One after-action report from the 3rd Armored Division described a tank column ambushed near St. Vith. Crew members used their M3s to clear German infantry within 30 yards of the tank. The weapon operated without malfunction despite heavy snow and mud. That line, "without malfunction," meant everything. In the brutal cold, even the M1 Garand struggled. Oil froze. Bolts seized. But the M3, with its loose tolerances and simple mechanism, kept firing. Soldiers found they could thaw frozen magazines over vehicle exhaust, reload, and continue fighting without issue. In the forest, the M3's slow rate of fire became its hidden strength. Its 450 rounds per minute allowed for short, precise bursts. Soldiers could conserve ammunition, a crucial factor when supply lines were cut. Its heavy 45 ACP rounds, though slow, hit hard in close combat, knocking down enemy soldiers behind trees or in foxholes. The grease gun's understated role was repeated across the front. At Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne Division held their ground under siege, paratroopers used M3s scavenged from tank units. In narrow streets and cellar fights, the weapon excelled. Its short barrel made it easy to maneuver indoors. Its simple safety system, though primitive, allowed soldiers to fire instinctively in split seconds. Just flip open the dust cover and squeeze. One veteran later recalled, "It looked like junk, but it never quit. When everything else was freezing, that thing still spat fire." While the M3 earned its reputation in Europe, it was also proving its worth half a world away. In the jungles of the Philippines and Burma, American and Commonwealth forces found that the same gun that thrived in snow could handle mud and rain with equal grace. The stamped steel didn't warp in humidity. The simple bolt resisted rust. And even after weeks in tropical conditions, a quick wipe with motor oil kept it operational. What the M3 lacked in elegance, it made up for in survivability. Soldiers began to understand that this was not a weapon built for prestige. It was built for the unglamorous truth of war: the dirt, the weather, the exhaustion. By early 1945, the grease gun had earned its place beside the M1 Garand and the Bar as one of America's most trusted infantry arms. Tankers refused to go into battle without it. Infantrymen swapped cigarettes for spare magazines, and the same commanders who had once called it a plumber's tool now requested it by name. Even within the chaos of the Ardennes, logistics officers noted something remarkable. M3 losses were easy to replace. A weapon so cheap, so easy to build, could be resupplied faster than any other firearm in the Army's inventory. Factories in Indiana were still turning them out, tens of thousands a month, and shipping them across the Atlantic in crates. By the war's final winter, the M3 had transformed from an experiment into a quiet icon. It wasn't the gun that won headlines or parades. It was the gun that simply worked, when every other system around it faltered. And as Allied forces pushed toward Germany in the final months of the war, George Hyde's $20 creation would again find itself in the thick of battle, not in the hands of officers or elite commandos, but in the muddy gloves of ordinary men holding the line. March 1945, Cologne, Germany. The Rhine River lay before them, swollen, cold, and lined with the ruins of a dying empire. Smoke curled from shattered rooftops. The echo of distant artillery rolled across the water like thunder. American forces had crossed into the heart of Germany, and the fighting was now street to street, house to house. In the rubble of Cologne, the M3 grease gun found its truest purpose. Tanks rumbled cautiously between collapsed buildings, while infantry advanced along the flanks, wary of snipers and Panzerfaust teams hidden among the debris. The city was a labyrinth. Stairwells blown open, walls pocked with bullet holes, alleys filled with smoke and dust. It was no place for long rifles or complex weapons. Here in this shattered urban jungle, soldiers needed something they could trust at arm's length, something light, compact, and brutally efficient, and that was exactly what the grease gun delivered. Inside the narrow hallways of apartments and bunkers, the 45 ACP rounds slammed through plaster and brick. The gun's modest rate of fire allowed for tight, controlled bursts, enough to drop an enemy without wasting a full magazine. Its wire stock could fold in seconds, turning it into a weapon you could swing like a tool in close combat. There were no fancy mechanics, no polished finish, just raw function, forged in America's industrial heartland and perfected in the chaos of war. When American forces captured the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen, it was another moment where the M3 quietly played its part. Engineers and infantry fought side by side under relentless German fire to secure the only intact bridge over the Rhine. Amid explosions and falling debris, tank crews used their M3s to cover sappers working beneath the bridge. The weapon's simplicity made it ideal for such improvised defense. No delicate parts to jam, no complicated maintenance under fire. One combat engineer remembered later, "You could dunk it in river water, shake it off, and it'd still run. We didn't clean it, we just kept shooting. This wasn't luck. It was design philosophy, born not from military theory, but from the mind of a man who understood machinery better than most generals, George Hyde." By early 1945, word had spread through every branch: tankers, paratroopers, engineers, even clerks in field depots. Everyone respected the M3. It became the unofficial sidearm of the American Tank Corps, replacing the Thompson not because it was prettier or more famous, but because it simply fit the job. It could be field stripped in seconds, repaired with a screwdriver, and cost less than a soldier's monthly pay. In an army stretched thin across continents, that mattered. Logistics was war, and the M3's brilliance was its efficiency. Back home, factories in Indiana and Michigan continued churning out the stamped steel guns with a rhythm that matched the beat of America's wartime industry. Women riveters and machinists assembled them by the thousands, packing each one with a small instruction tag: "Grease lightly before use." That's how the nickname grease gun truly stuck. Soldiers joked that it looked like a mechanic's tool, and the name never left. In the ruins of Germany, soldiers began to realize what they were carrying was more than just a weapon. It was the embodiment of American pragmatism, power through simplicity. When Berlin finally fell and the guns began to fall silent, many M3s stayed behind, in the hands of Allied occupation forces, tank crews, and even engineers rebuilding bridges and roads. The weapon had survived snow, mud, rain, and fire, and it kept doing what it was built to do: work. That reliability earned it another life. When the Korean War erupted just 5 years later, the M3 returned, upgraded with a few small changes: a redesigned charging handle, a new safety mechanism, and the addition of A1 to its name. But its soul remained untouched. Even in Vietnam, long after it should have been replaced, American tank crews still carried the M3A1. It became a quiet companion, a link to the men who'd first carried it across Europe. Soldiers joked that it looked old-fashioned, almost laughable next to the M16, until the moment the jungle humidity jammed the newer rifle and the grease gun kept firing. By then it had earned a reputation few weapons ever achieve: trust, not beauty, not fame, but trust. Every dent, every scratch on its dull gray surface told a story of survival. From the frozen Ardennes to the burning streets of Cologne, from the rice paddies of Korea to the tunnels of Vietnam. It was a $20 invention that refused to die. And for George Hyde, the quiet German-born engineer who'd once worked in America's auto factories, that was the greatest triumph of all. His little stamped steel creation had outlived the war, the generals, and even the era that gave birth to it. As the smoke cleared over Europe in 1945, thousands of American soldiers brought home memories of that crude-looking weapon, the one that never quit. It wasn't polished, it wasn't heroic-looking, but it was theirs, a mechanic's gun that became a soldier's best friend. A $20 machine that helped win a $4 trillion war. And in doing so, it quietly became America's most reliable weapon. Spring 1945, Germany had fallen. The Reich lay in ruins. Allied soldiers walked through silent cities, the echoes of war fading into the rubble. Among the souvenirs of victory, captured Lugers, helmets, and flags, there was one tool that quietly stayed in the hands of America's fighting men: the M3 grease gun. When the U.S. Army began assessing post-war equipment, many expected the grease gun to disappear, a temporary wartime measure like so many stopgaps of total war. But that didn't happen. The little $20 weapon refused to fade. What began as an industrial shortcut had evolved into a symbol of practical reliability. It was ugly, yes. Crude, even. But it did what mattered most. It worked in any condition. The U.S. Ordnance Department took notice. Engineers at Springfield Armory reviewed field reports and found something remarkable. Despite its low production cost, the M3's failure rate was lower than many precision-machined firearms. The military's conclusion was simple but profound. Simplicity was strength. This realization would ripple through decades of American weapons design. The M3 wasn't just a gun, it was a lesson. In 1948, the M3A1 was officially adopted. It was lighter, more refined, and even easier to use. The side-mounted crank handle was replaced with a finger hole for direct bolt operation, eliminating yet another moving part. The ejection port doubled as a dust cover and safety mechanism. Every design tweak followed Hyde's philosophy: fewer parts, fewer problems. The U.S. Army began issuing the M3A1 widely to armored units, paratroopers, and mechanized infantry. In tanks, space was scarce, and the compact M3A1 fit perfectly in tight corners. Soldiers could bail out with it in seconds, ready to fight. For mechanics, truck drivers, and engineers, it was the ideal sidearm. Even elite units saw its value. During the Korean War, 1950-1953, American and UN forces carried the M3A1 into frozen mountains and muddy valleys. Its slow, deliberate rate of fire, once criticized, became an advantage in close combat, allowing soldiers to conserve ammunition during chaotic engagements. It had none of the glamour of the Thompson, none of the innovation of the Sten, yet it outlasted them both. As the Cold War deepened, the M3's legend grew quietly in the background. American tankers in West Germany kept it at their side throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Its small size and subsonic 45 rounds made it perfect for close defense against potential Soviet saboteurs or infiltrators. Meanwhile, the weapon began appearing in unexpected hands. South Korean forces, Taiwanese paratroopers, and even CIA field operatives. The agency valued it for one simple reason: it could be easily suppressed. A custom silencer turned the already quiet grease gun into a whispering ghost, ideal for covert missions in Cold War hotspots. One CIA report described it as the most dependable close-quarters weapon for field operatives: silent, simple, and untraceable. Its legacy had outgrown its humble birth, but perhaps the greatest testament to its reliability came 2 decades later, in the jungles of Vietnam. By the late 1960s, the U.S. military had transitioned to the M16, a sleek, lightweight rifle made of aluminum and plastic. But when humidity, mud, and poor maintenance caused the M16 to jam, soldiers began to rediscover the value of the M3A1. American tank crews and helicopter mechanics in Vietnam often kept the grease gun as a personal backup. Many said they preferred it over the M16 for one simple reason: it always fired. A U.S. armored crewman recalled in an interview, "It looked old, like it belonged in a museum. But when everything else jammed, that little grease gun still did its job." By the time Saigon fell in 1975, some of those same M3A1s had served through 3 major wars, a record few small arms in history can claim. And still, their story wasn't over, because even as new technologies emerged, laser sights, plastic frames, advanced metallurgy, the U.S. military continued to issue the M3A1 to tank crews well into the 1990s. Nearly half a century after its invention, George Hyde's simple stamped steel gun remained in active service. It had survived the fall of Hitler, the rise of the Soviets, and the dawn of the computer age, and it did so with only a handful of moving parts, each one doing exactly what it was designed to do. By the late 20th century, the M3A1's official service was winding down, but its influence had already spread far beyond American battlefields. In design schools, military academies, and weapons laboratories, the grease gun became a case study, a blueprint for efficiency and reliability. Engineers studied its stamped steel construction, minimal moving parts, and closed-bolt firing system. The philosophy was clear: a simple, mass-producible weapon could outlast more complex, expensive designs. Globally, the M3 inspired a generation of submachine guns. The Israeli Uzi, adopted in the 1950s, borrowed heavily from its compact stamped steel design principles. Swedish, South Korean, and Latin American forces adapted its core ideas for their own armies. Even in clandestine operations, the concept of a small, reliable weapon with minimal maintenance requirements traced directly back to Hyde's $20 invention. In the U.S., the M3 became a quiet legend. Veterans of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam remembered it not for glamour but for trust. Unlike the Thompson or M1 carbine, it had never failed them under extreme conditions. Tank crews recalled it as the only weapon that could survive the cramped, dirty interiors of their vehicles. Paratroopers spoke of it as the gun they could jump with and rely on upon landing. Its symbolism was more profound than mere utility. The grease gun embodied the industrial genius of wartime America, mass production meeting frontline necessity. A weapon that cost $20, built in an automobile plant and wielded by ordinary soldiers, became a decisive factor in multiple conflicts. It was a triumph of practicality over prestige, function over form, a reminder that in total war, reliability often mattered more than appearance. Even today, M3s are prized by collectors, historians, and small arms enthusiasts. Museums around the world display them alongside M1 Garands, Thompson submachine guns, and MP40s. Each piece tells the story of ingenuity under pressure, a testament to an era when America had to arm millions and could not afford failure. The end of its active service marked not the end of its legacy. The lessons of the M3, simplicity, mass production, and rugged reliability, continue to inform modern firearms development. Its story serves as a reminder that innovation doesn't always require complexity. Sometimes a well-designed $20 gun can outlast the war, outlast the generals, and outlast history itself. By 1990, when the last M3s were retired from American service, the weapon had quietly achieved what few others ever do. It became immortal, not because it was flashy or rare or celebrated in propaganda, but because it never betrayed those who depended on it. In every sense, George Hyde's creation had earned its place in history. And as post-war America looked back on the sacrifices, strategies, and ingenuity of the Second World War, the grease gun stood as a symbol that sometimes the simplest tools can carry the heaviest weight of history. The story of the M3 grease gun is in many ways the story of America at war. It is not a tale of glamour, medals, or heroic speeches. It is a story of pragmatism, ingenuity, and quiet perseverance, of a weapon born not from ambition but from necessity. George Hyde, an immigrant engineer, never sought fame. He sought solutions. In a world consumed by war, he asked one simple question: how do we equip millions of men with a gun that works no matter the conditions and costs less than a soldier's rations? His answer was neither elegant nor flashy. It was a stamped steel cylinder, a folding wire stock, a weapon so plain it could be dismissed at first glance. Yet in that simplicity lay its power. Across the frozen forests of the Ardennes, the mud-choked villages of Normandy, and the burning streets of Cologne, soldiers discovered what Hyde already knew. Reliability is a form of heroism. A gun that never jams, that never hesitates, that simply does its job, can save lives in ways no parade or medal ever could. The M3 also symbolizes a broader truth about warfare and technology, that innovation is often measured not by sophistication, but by adaptability. It teaches that industrial scale, practicality, and human trust can outweigh luxury and precision. In the balance of total war, these qualities are priceless. Even decades later, as armies transitioned to advanced rifles and high-tech firearms, the grease gun endured in memory and legend. It reminds us that sometimes the humblest inventions leave the deepest mark, that a $20 gun, designed for efficiency, could become one of the most dependable weapons in modern military history. And perhaps that is the final lesson. In the crucible of war, survival often favors the unassuming, the steadfast, the reliable. George Hyde's creation endured not because it was celebrated, but because it was faithful. A small, quiet testament to the ingenuity, resourcefulness, and human resilience that defined an era. The M3 grease gun did not just fight battles. It fought for trust, for practicality, and for the men who carried it, leaving a legacy that echoes far beyond its steel and bolts.